This is Hellesen, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Joe Hellesen programmed the Atari 8-bit versions of Deluxe Invaders, published by Roklan, and Pac Man, published by Atari, Gyruss, published by Parker Brothers, and Mickey and the Great Outdoors, published by Disney. He also coded PQ, the party quiz game, for SunCom, and coded games for many other platforms. In this interview, we discuss Ron Borta of Roklan Software and Bill Steely, co-founder of Microprose, both of whom I previously interviewed. There's links to those interviews in the show notes at ataripodcast.com. This interview took place on April 14th, 2018.
I was an avid video game player, kind of prior to the Atari era. I had a Bally arcade, and I think I bought every cartridge they had, and I enjoyed playing it. And when the Atari came out, I was still, very much an active game player. And I think it all kind of started when Atari released their version of Space Invaders. Mm-hmm. And it didn't seem to me like a very good representation of the arcade game. So I decided to learn a little bit about programming. And I bought a book on the 6502 microprocessor and kind of fooled around with Atari Basic, I guess it was, and figured out a way to write an assembly language program using Basic. I forget right now what all the commands were, but I got some stuff to run, and it was interesting. I think the first time I went to the arcade game and I looked at all the original creatures and stuff that are dropping bombs on everybody, and kind of made some notes on what they look like. And I programmed the whole thing in Atari Basic, I believe, and it ran so slow it was unplayable. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what got me into assembly language. Mm-hmm. So I ended up rewriting it in assembly language. I found eventually I found an assembly language compiler and stuff like that where I could. It was a little fancier than some of the primitive tools that I was using. I kind of wrote my own program for doing that, and got all that stuff to work. And I finally finished an assembly language playable version of Space Invaders, and I took it to Ron Borta, and I showed it to him, and he was very interested in it. And I think shortly after that, he hired me, and I started working for him. And he marketed the program as Deluxe Invaders, mm-hmm. and I think it did pretty well. I remember getting at least one royalty check from it, and it, in its era, it was a pretty good game, and I think that kind of opened the door for me doing the Pac Man game for Atari. Mm-hmm. I think Ron and Roklan, or can't remember exactly when Roklan started, but Ron got the deal with Atari, and I don't think they paid us very much, but to me it was kind of a prestige issue. I mean, at that time in history, Pac Man was huge. There was a huge demand for it, and I did pretty much everything: the artwork, the sound, the programming. I had a little bit of help from people with a musical ear on some of the sounds and stuff like that. But it fit in a single chip, and gave that back to Atari. Finally got it approved, and I think it's an 8K chip, ROM chip that the whole program fit in. And by today's standards, that's like absolutely minuscule.
Yeah,
but that was the technology at the time, and I was pretty proud of that accomplishment. It was kind of a feather in my hat that I had, that I did that program, and I really enjoyed working on it, and that kind of led to other Atari projects and maybe some other particular platforms. While I was still working for Roklan and beyond. So that's kind of the prehistory of my involvement. I did work on some other games. I'm trying to think of which ones were specific to the Atari. I believe that we did Wizard of War for the what do they call the VCS, the old Atari, but that's
right. You did it for the VCS and also for the 5200, although I don't know if you programmed that one.
I think that was done by a gentleman named Joe Wagner, and he may have had another programmer helping him with that. He's also kind of from the Roklan era. Mm-hmm. I've done a bunch of other video games in that time span, but some of them were other platforms.
Sure.
Probably not relevant to talk about those platforms here.
How did you meet Ron? You said you went to him with your Deluxe Invaders, but
I can't remember. You know, he might have called me and we arranged a time to meet at his office or something. I can't remember exactly how I got hooked up with him, but you know, I went to his office and I showed him the program and told him I wrote it myself, and he was very impressed, and it kind of went on from there. I did Party Quiz for the Atari, and that's after I left Roklan. Roklan kind of folded at some point. Trying to think of what other games I did do.
I have a list here. I don't know if this list is complete, but what I have is Wizard of War for the 2600, I guess. Pac Man, PQ, the Party Quiz game for SunCom, Gyruss for the 8-bit. I'm
trying to remember. I know I did. I think I did do actually a program, the Gyruss program, and a gentleman by the name of Cam Schaefer helped out with that. And I think we also did another platform of the same game, which had a little bit better hardware than the sprite system on the Atari 800, which made it easier to program in another platform. But we figured out a way of reusing the sprites. As you kind of, go down the screen, you could reuse the sprites. I think somebody discovered that you could do that. It's like a horizontal interrupt that you could intercept and change all the parameters of the sprite display while it was drawing the screen.
Right, as long as you wait till it's drawn the first time, and then you can tweak parameters and get that done before it draws it the second time.
Actually, you're kind of following the beam down the screen. You've got like this... The sprite, I believe, was like, I can't remember, 8 pixels wide or something like that, and the full length of the screen. So we were able to, kind of follow the electron beam down the screen and change what it's doing. So you could have one sprite at one height, and using the same hardware sprite, reuse that for something else lower on the screen. So that technology was utilized for Gyruss.
Your Pac Man game is great. It was literally the first program that my dad bought. I think he bought it at the same time he got the Atari 800. And man, it's a great implementation.
Well, great. Thank you very much. I remember that when I first started working on it, they had a Pac Man game, arcade game delivered to my apartment. I think I was on the 10th floor of some building or something like that. They wheeled it in and they rigged it up so I didn't have to put a quarter in it. I could just, open the door and flip the lever, and I would get as many credits as I wanted.
Yeah.
And I think I started playing that game as soon as I plugged it in and got it going 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And I think I played it through the night, because you didn't need a quarter, So I kind of like learned a little bit, through playing it about how the ghosts operate and what they're looking for, and it seemed I was able to develop some rules on what they're looking for, and kind of like they can't see you unless you are actually in their line of sight, and then if you cross their path, then they'll start chasing you. But if you're in another path where none of them can see you, they're kind of oblivious to what's going on. So I kind of wrote that into the rules, trying to figure out where you are in relationship to them. And yeah, it was a real experience, and I'm very proud of that game. It was a lot of fun doing it, and I'm glad a lot of people enjoyed it. I myself have, not recently, but a long time ago, I used to play that game on the Atari for hours and hours and hours, and I enjoyed it too. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
How long did they give you to code it up?
I can't remember, but it was all done, I think, within a 6-month period.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't pay a lot for it either.
They paid.
I don't want to say how much I got paid for it, but it wasn't a lot.
Well,
it wasn't.
Yeah. Ron told me that he was paid $25,000 for the game, and it was the best investment he ever made because it helped him get that company going.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, well, I didn't even receive half of that, so.
Sorry.
Well, he made out better than I did. But Deluxe Invaders and Pac Man are probably my two favorite ones from the Atari 8-bit world. I was able to do a lot of stuff with the character set function. I think that's how I built the with custom character sets, custom multicolor character sets.
Mm-hmm.
There's one mode where you could mix and match your colors, and that's how I made the background for the maze that the Pac Man went on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think there actually was a fifth sprite somewhere for something that I was able to utilize.
You're right. You're right. You could combine the 4 missiles to make a fifth sprite. That's what you must have done. Right.
I think that's what I did, yeah. Because I think when I wrote that, I wasn't aware of being able to switch those particular sprites on the fly. So I just, used the 5 that were available to me. And you're right about the missile sprites, now I remember. So,
did Atari they didn't give you source code or anything to work from? They just put the arcade game in your room and said, here, copy this?
I don't think Atari, well, I'm not sure if Ron did or Atari did it. It might have come out of that $25,000 that he was paid, where he rented the machine or something like that and put it in my room. But no, I asked for source code because it would have helped me, at least with the logic and stuff like that. I had written several programs to. I worked for Microprose down the road too. By that time, the Atari 8-bit stuff was dead. I did some Atari ST stuff for them, and I wrote several programs that would read source code and convert it into C or another assembler or something like that. So I had a lot of success doing that. So yeah, I've written a lot of utility applications to help me do source code, and I probably could have done something like that had I had access to the original source code. Now, I could have taken the chips out and disassembled it and used that, but I think I was kind of new at programming then, and I think that was more than I wanted to take on at that time, down the road. I mean, I was a programmer for a long time, and I still am. Yeah, it would have been helpful, but no, I didn't have it. So I basically tried to play the arcade game, and I think I bought some books on the patterns that, I believe the way the logic also works on that is there's a bunch of different patterns that the ghosts can run, and they run those patterns. But if they see you, then they'll start chasing you. So the ghosts will run, random patterns and stuff like that, and all the time they're looking for you. So yeah, I kind of figured that out myself by reading books about people that have played, Pac Man a lot, and I think I actually started on a Ms. Pac Man game, but Roklan fell off the charts. I think I may have made one for myself, and I'm not sure that I actually finished that. But I think I did design a game board for that, and I played around with it a little bit, but I don't think it ever saw the light of day. I'm not sure why the 8-bit Atari stuff is still relevant, because it's, the technology is so ancient compared to today's technology, but there was a lot of fun games that were made back then, and now everything's 3D, and you need an entire art studio and millions of dollars to make a game, and 3D animators, and life was a lot simpler back then. You could calculate a trajectory in 2D and stuff like that, and now you're in the 3D world, and things are way more complicated.
Sure.
So kind of evolved now. But I think we may see a resurgence of some of these two-dimensional games just because they were a lot of fun. I remember playing another game, Miner 2049er. That was one of my favorite Atari 8-bit games, and I didn't have anything to do with writing the program or not, but I did enjoy playing it quite a bit.
Yeah, it was a good one. So on Pac Man, you mentioned something about you had to get approval from Atari, which makes sense. Do you remember anything specific about going around and know they wanted something changed, perhaps?
They put it through a very rigorous testing program, and I fixed bugs, and I think I even got some recordings of some malfunctions where like a sprite would go off screen or something like that, and I was able to fix it based upon what I saw in the video. So they did basically pretty heavy duty testing, and then when they released it, I never heard from them again about that. So it's not like today where you have bug fixes and revisions to programs. Back then, everything else was in ROM, and once it goes to that plastic ROM, I mean, we used EPROMs for development and EPROM simulators and stuff like that. But once it goes to production and they buy, a ton of those pre-programmed ROMs, there's no follow-up version or anything like that to fix bugs. So they do the bug testing intensively. I remember, I think I signed some sort of non-disclosure agreement with them way back in the day, and I think we're talking early 80s when I actually did this, 82 or 83. I think that's the time era. Because I was working as a electronics technician for Fairchild Camera and Instrument at the time, and I was playing the Atari and messing around with some of the code at the time, and Ron offered to double my salary. He says, I'll hire you right now, and here's what I'll pay. And I said, okay, great. So I came to work, and at that point I was a programmer. But it kind of evolved from me taking an interest in it, and I moved on to Microsoft stuff and C++ and C# and some of the more modern programming languages.
Sure. How long did you work at Roklan, approximately?
Oh, maybe 2 or 3 years.
Okay. So you came to them with the Deluxe Invaders, and you did Pac Man. What else did you program for them while you were there?
I think we did a Walt Disney game. I'm not sure if that ever
Mickey and the Great Outdoors?
Yeah, that's the name of the program. Did that ever see the light of day? I can't remember.
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah, I worked on that. There may be some others. I haven't mentioned any of that stuff I used to mention that stuff in my resume, 20 years ago or whatever.
Sure.
It's hardly relevant now, so I kind of, a lot of that stuff has kind of dropped off the map for me, and this is kind of a blast from the past, just talking about this stuff. And I'm kind of having some recollections of it now. But
so tell me about the end of your time at Roklan. What happened?
Well, I believe that we we made a game, and I think Ron bet the whole company's future on this game that it would do really well. And I think it failed drastically to live up to expectations. So the company kind of went bankrupt.
What game was this?
And I can't remember. It might have been Mickey and the Great Outdoors. I can't remember exactly what game it was, but I think Ron and the management of Roklan bet the farm on the game, and they lost. And So all of us had to find new jobs, and the company broke up at that point because they were out of money, and we all needed to get paid, so we had to do something else. Mm-hmm. That's kind of my recollection. I can't remember exactly what Camel broke, how this thing broke down and what particular game it was.
Yeah.
It could have been Gyruss or something like that. I don't remember.
Okay.
I might find some reference to that.
Did you program for any other platforms when you were at Roklan, or were you exclusively the Atari guy?
I think we did some Commodore 64 stuff. I know I did Gyruss on the Commodore 64, and I think there's a few other games, Iridium or something like that. We did that program.
Tell me about SunCom and how you got to do PQ, the party quiz game.
Okay, well, at that point I was an independent contractor, and I believe a gentleman by the name of Quinn, I can't remember his first name, I somehow either knew him from Roklan or had bumped into him, and he wanted to do this trivia game, and they were going to make custom paddles for it and stuff like that, and I agreed to do that. We signed a contract, and I completed the game for them. I think it got released. Did it get released?
Yeah, it did. It's a great game.
Okay, great. So yeah, I worked on that, and kind of went through that whole scene and finished that and moved on. It wasn't as much fun for me as the action games because it was everything was kind of static and didn't have really that many, cool visual effects in it. But it was functional. I did have I think there's a bunch of questions we had in and answers and stuff like that programmed in there. And, and Mr. Quinn and his staff was fun to work for. And, it was a positive experience for me. It just, it wasn't as much fun for me programming wise, because I think one of the fun things about being a video game programmer is you write the code, now you got to test it, so you got to play the game,
Sure.
And it wasn't as much fun to play as Deluxe Invaders or Pac Man or Wizard of War or any of these other games. I think I had the Wizard of War game in my office as well for a couple of months, trying to figure out how that game worked. Although I didn't do the Atari 8-bit version of that, or the 800 version of that. So yeah, I that may have been my last Atari 8-bit game, but there may have been one or two more. I think I did a takeoff of Joust. I think I did a Joust game for the Commodore 64.
Was it Joust 2, Survival of the Fittest?
That was it, yeah. And I think that was on the Commodore 64.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if you go online and look up my name, that you'll see most of the games that I was involved in. And I think it's fairly accurate. Did a bunch of stuff on Sega afterwards, which had even better video hardware, but still by today's standards is pretty primitive. And at that point, I think after the Commodore 64, I kind of moved on to PCs and doing stuff on the PCs. I did do Michael Jordan and Larry Bird go one-on-one for Electronic Arts on the Commodore 64, and that was a fun game to work on. We had a good time doing that game.
Tell me.
It's not Atari.
Well, that's all right. Tell me what was fun about it.
I think the artist that I was working for, he came out to Illinois. He was from Washington State, and we collaborated on it. And I met him. Mark Madland, I think was his name, and he was a fun guy. And we had a lot of fun doing this. And we actually got to meet Larry Bird and Michael Jordan in Chicago. I guess the Boston Celtics were in town, and the Boston Celtics had made arrangements to practice at some high school gym in Chicago, and it was arranged that myself and I can't remember who else would with me. It might have been Ron Borda. Oh, actually, it wouldn't have been Ron Borda because this is EA. Jeff Traeger, I think was his name, or something like that. He was the project manager. I think he was there, and we got to talk to Larry and Michael. And I'll never forget the first time I actually laid eyes on Michael in person. I was a huge fan. I watched every basketball game he played, and I thought he was a phenomenal basketball player. And it made watching basketball so much fun to watch him play. And he walked into the gym, and I saw him walk in, and I swear he had an aura around him. I mean, I was just like in awe. It's like, wow, this is Michael Jordan, And we sat down and we talked to him. We asked him, we kind of broke the court up into quadrants and say, okay, what's your shot percentage from here? What's it from here? And so we could kind of program that into the game. So, if Michael's on at one particular spot on the court, he's going to hit this shot like 90% of the time or something like that. And then I think we had a slam dunk contest in there and some other stuff. We got some of Michael's windmill dunks. And I think probably for me, the funnest part of that was, working with the artists and actually getting to meet Michael Jordan and Larry Bird. At that time, I don't believe we did we were even considering an Atari 8-bit version because the graphics were pretty complicated.
That game did come out for the 8-bit. I pirated it, so I don't know who programmed it, but somebody did.
Okay. I think that we did a PC version of that. Another programmer did the PC version, and it was very similar. But then again, the graphics were even better because the PC had better hardware. So that's another one that stuck out on my mind. I was a video game programmer for I think about 25 years, and for me, it was frustrating, working for a company and then seeing them go bankrupt and having to find another job, and it seemed like that was kind of a pattern. The video game company would have some success and they just invest all their money in the next game, and if the next game didn't pan out, then they're broke or got to make staff layoffs. And I moved out to Maryland to work for Microprose. I met Major Bill, Wild Bill Staley, who was the CEO of the company, and he's an ex-fighter pilot, and he did the F-15. Him and I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name that was his partner there. He did Civilization.
Right, Sid Meier.
Sid Meier, yes. I worked with Sid and Bill, and I did F-117A Project Stealth Fighter 2.0, and that was at the time of the first Gulf War with I think Bush was president, and it was like a bombing campaign over Iraq and stuff like that, and different theaters. We had like a Cuban theater. We're trying to project where the next war might be. We didn't know. And so we put in all these different theaters and bombing missions and stuff like that. And I think we also worked on a futuristic submarine game. And, it was mostly military simulations, and I found that to be a lot of fun. And I remember doing a port of M1 Tank Platoon to the Atari ST, and that worked out very well. And I actually utilized my talent of converting source code. I had the IBM PC source code for that because it was written in-house. They gave that to me. I was able to write a program to translate the 386 code into Motorola 68000 code, so I didn't have to redo all the logic, and that worked out very well. So that was one of my first attempts at doing that. I always thought I could do it, and it worked out very well. So I think I utilized that technique down the road a couple other times. Can't remember the exact one, but eventually I got tired of having to find a new job with a new video game company, and at that point I think the graphics and the physics and the math were getting to be a little bit overwhelming for me. All the 3D calculations you got to make and stuff like that, and I decided. After 25 years of being a video game programmer, to let's see if we can get a job in business, and utilize some of these programming skills for a more stable company, and that's kind of what I've been doing ever since then. I've worked for law firms and manufacturers and stuff like that. So that's kind of where my career path has taken me. Mm-hmm. Right now, I'm a private contractor, kind of retired from working from other companies at this point, but I still have some code I'm working on for several individuals and corporations. So still got my hand in the fire as far as doing programming, and I love the career change. I think before that I went to DeVry and I got an education in electronics and programming and stuff like that, and I was a hardware technician for quite a few years, and it was kind of fun to trade it. Now instead of the hardware, now I'm working on software. So I kind of saw where that went. If something failed, the hardware guys would blame the software guys. And now that I've become a programmer, it can't be the software. It's got to be the hardware. You guys are at fault.
Of course.
Trading back and forth. Yeah. So it's been a long career of programming, and I've really enjoyed being a programmer throughout the years, but we've worked on some pretty demanding schedules. I can remember working 80-hour weeks for some companies, to complete the job, and that part of it certainly is no fun. We always had this crunch around the end of the year, to have the product on the shelves for Christmas shopping, and it's got to be released by so and so, and we got to order, ROMs or discs or whatever by this date, and there's always a lot of pressure to get it done on time. So I don't miss that part of it.
Sure.
But I did enjoy my years working as a video game programmer, and the matrix math stuff and trying to figure out where the light shadow is cast, and it's just really overwhelming. So
yeah.
I kind of got out of that business and moved on. But that's pretty much my story.
All right. I thought of another question about Atari stuff, if you don't mind. Can you tell me about your development environment for stuff like Pac Man and the Deluxe Invaders and that sort of thing? Were you compiling on the Atari, or was this cross-compiled or something else?
I can't remember exactly when I switched. I think I did Pac Man on the Atari using they had an assembler cartridge that I used, and I think I also used an assembler from OSS or something like that.
Sure.
It was a disk-based assembler and operating system, and I kind of moved over to that, the disk-based operating system.
That was a much faster assembler than the Atari assembler, so
Yes, it was. I remember using that. At some point, I switched over to a CP/M system, I think a CP/M or something like that, and I had I think I had a 10 megabyte hard drive, which I thought, my God, I'll never fill this thing up. This is absolutely huge. My wife just brought me a picture of myself, Michael Jordan, and Michael's agent, Don Traeger or Jeff Traeger, I think it might have been Don Traeger, and Mark Madland, I think was his name, the artist, and we're looking at we're all looking at a screen that we're working on, and Michael's very intensely looking at it.
Wow!
And we're all looking at it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of cool to be in the same picture with Michael Jordan. So. Yeah, I used that CP/M compiler for a while. I think I used that for the 8-bit Atari, and we had ROM simulators that I think I did some Atari 8-bit stuff on there. We did have 6502 cross compilers, and it used those great big giant 8-inch floppies. And that was a big step forward in computing power, and the speed of that we could turn around some code into something that you could compile and then run. You wouldn't have to burn an EEPROM. Or actually, I think I used to run a lot of that stuff right in memory. I had the 48K version, and if the cartridge is only 8K, I can find 8K to test the game in. So a lot of that stuff I would run in RAM when I was running the Atari and OSS compilers. And when we moved on to the CPM system, we had a ROM simulator we used for that, and that worked out very well too. So I can remember building, some of the security that we built into stuff. I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about.
Oh yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
It was kind of a challenge to try and figure out what games used for security, and I think the big thing with the ROM security was making sure that it wouldn't run in RAM. Okay, and so if you could get an EEPROM reader and read the EEPROM, and then if you you downloaded it to your computer and ran it in RAM, it would crash for one reason or another. And that was one of the things that was pretty standard built into a lot of the ROM-based games, that basically you would write to a very critical portion of memory, like in a vertical an interrupt or something like that, vertical scan interrupt or something like that, retrace interrupt, I can't remember exactly what it was called, to zero out all that code. And when the interrupt would come, the program would crash. And I think something like that was built into the Atari 8-bit game. So, when I tried it myself, you copy the ROM, put it in RAM, and sure enough, it would freeze up, So that was one of the popular techniques back then for securing the games from being copied. Now, when we went to disk for a lot of games, now how do you protect a disk from being copied? So we actually had some custom-made Atari 810 floppy drives with custom ROMs, which gave us the capability of making duplicate sectors. So I can't remember how many sectors there were in a track, but say, for example, there might have been 32. And so we would maybe make one track that had 31 unique sectors and then one duplicate sector. And when the game would load, it would know about that duplicate sector, and it would read that sector twice, and then it would have to sort out which one was the one that it wanted, and which one was the bad one, which we put in there to screw up people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't have that duplicate sector in there, then the game wouldn't run, it wouldn't load, and it wouldn't run. So that was another one of the security things that was built in during that time to keep people from copying stuff. So it proved to be pretty effective. I mean, a really hardcore hacker or something is going to figure that out, but it certainly, a lot of that stuff certainly prevented casual copying, where you just, okay, I'm going to make a copy of it and then see if I can get it to run, And back then, you could actually step through the program and see where it crashed. So that's where that's how I was able to figure out how other programmers were doing their copy protection and stuff like that by stepping through the program, and I'd load the program in and then single step through it and then set a breakpoint or something, and I could see where the program would crash and what they were doing. And I think that was a hobby of a lot of people back then, is trying to crack the protection on a lot of those video games. And that was part of that era too. Nowadays it's much more sophisticated. I mean, you got the internet, and they can check your key or serial number or whatever online to make sure it's correct. And that certainly was, that stuff was totally unavailable back then, but I guess that's the way it works now. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a challenge back then, and it was, kind of a requirement of all the games that you do. And I think I still have that 810 drive with the custom operating system capable of making duplicate sectors, but I'd have to find the software somewhere that I used to do that.
Sure.
That was part of that day and age.
Yeah. Well, if you ever got it into your just bonnet that you wanted to try programming the Atari 8-bit again, it's a whole nother. It's wonderful now. You can do it on your PC or your Mac, and there's cross compilers, and basically compiling takes a fraction of a second, and all of a sudden you can see your work in the emulator running on your machine, and it's a whole different experience now.
Yeah, well, that sounds great. Yeah, I don't know. If something came up, I might be willing to try something like that. Do they have any decent C compilers or C++ compilers for the 8-bit now? Or that stuff I know have a memory hog.
I don't think people really use C. Assembly language and Action, and there's a few other languages, but I don't think C ever really caught on for that machine.
I remember they made a C compiler, but it was slow and it was pretty inefficient.
Yep.
So yeah, I still remember how to do assembly language programming. It's kind of a lost art and not really much in demand nowadays. But yeah, I'll never forget how to do that stuff. I think the processor I loved the most was the Motorola 68000.
Mm-hmm.
Had 32-bit registers, and you could do all kinds of stuff with it.
If you could send a message to the Atari 8-bit users that still exist, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Not sure. Not sure what I would tell them.
Okay.
I certainly would be supportive of them, and if there's something I could do to help them, I would be willing to do it as long as it didn't take too much of my time. I do have a bunch of other things I'm working on right now, and some of it is this old house type stuff, rehabilitating the old house that I bought, which is I've had to kind of like learn construction on the fly, but it's getting done. So
nice. Well, thank you so much, Joe. This is great.
Okay, Kevin. Well, it's been nice talking to you. I think I've dodged your requests in the past, and I'm kind of glad we got together and we're having this conversation, and you don't have to track me down anymore. I'm living in Valparaiso, Indiana.
Uh-huh.
Lived in Illinois for many years, but we bought a home down here. It's an older home, and we're trying to fix it up. So
that's great.
That's our now, and I still do some programming on the side, so I try to keep my skill set relatively fresh. Done a lot of stuff with databases and user interfaces. So if they ever if the 8-bit group ever needs anybody like a database expert or anything like that, I could probably help out in that area if they want to use that to keep track of stuff, or maybe they already have somebody, I don't know. But that's my skill set nowadays, C#, database stuff, and business programming, and, graphical user interfaces. So
nice. Awesome.
I could pass that on.
This was great. Thank you so much. Cool.
Thanks, Kevin. You have a good day.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are two ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/Savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.